Howdy folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Thursday, October the 29th, 2015, and I have the great honor of meeting with Mr. Rick Rule of Sprott Global. How are you doing today, Rick?
I'm fine, Rory, and I need to return the compliment. I've enjoyed your YouTube channel, so it's a real pleasure to have the ability to address your audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That really means a lot to me. And we are at the New Orleans Investment Conference, and I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about what's going on with the market and in the event of a global currency reset. In your view, Rick, is there much likelihood that the U.S. would avoid having to audit the gold held at the Federal Reserve, or might the world powers involved in such a reset decide that there is more risk with transparency than with opacity, thus accepting the stated gold reserve figures on faith?
I don't think that the powers that be, the people that would make that decision, care about gold, which is one of the reasons that I do. I'm different from most of our community in that I think that the gold price will go higher, but I'm not a subscriber to the great man theory because I've met so few of them. And my own belief is that gold is, if you will, a four-letter word at best among those people. I've had occasion to pose questions to the high and mighty on occasion, some of the high and mighty on occasion, about gold, and I don't get a hostile response from them. I get a quizzical response like, why are you asking me about a sideshow? I don't believe it's a sideshow, but I believe that people who make the decisions at the level that you're describing think of it as a sideshow. And if you think about it from their point of view, Rory, why wouldn't they? If you were a central banker, there's two things that stick out with regards to gold. The first is that it doesn't pay a yield. So it's an asset that doesn't yield any income for the current account. The second thing is that the narrative around gold implies a lack of faith in central bankers. And if you're a central banker, it's not a particularly comforting thing to think about, particularly given that there's been a bull market in bonds. In other words, there's been a bull market in what you do for 30 years. So from my point of view, to the extent that there was a reset, at least the first recourse with regards to the big thinkers would be to liquidity as opposed to reality, and gold wouldn't enter into the equation.
And last night, you conducted a panel, and Marion Catus was on there, and commodities were a big part of that. And one of the things that has come up over and again is, with all of the geopolitical issues that we're having right now, it seems that either reset, QE, more QE, or war, world war. How do you see with the current? I mean, there's so many things that are happening in our world right now that are just completely unprecedented. From my perspective, I mean, they're unprecedented. I mean, how do you see any of that, or am I just way off base here with that?
My belief is, first of all, that there's enough confidence in the world economy that they can keep this game going a bit. The big thinkers of the world talk in the context of a shortage of U.S. treasuries available to buy. Those of us who practice arithmetic as opposed to politics and sociology say, why would you buy an instrument that was non-scarce? Why would you buy the instrument of a creditor that is, from a lot of points of view, insolvent? But the truth is that the world is beating the door to US dollar denominated instruments. My own belief is that over time, the arithmetic associated with the US 10-year Treasury is going to diminish demand for it. But my suspicion is that that won't occur for 2 or 3 years. I may be wrong. Now, the problem with being able to kick the can down the road, kick the problem down the road, is that you finance it. And of course, the more times you finance it, the larger the problem is ultimately. So while I don't doubt that some form of reset is necessary, I have no idea when the reset will occur or the form that the reset takes. Let's suggest as an example that with regards to quantitative easing, that is counterfeiting,
Right.
that the U.S. government merely redeems its existing debt, that is canceled, You take a $3 trillion asset off the books and you take $3 trillion in liabilities off the books. That makes way, way, way too much sense. So it probably would never occur. But the truth is that there doesn't need to be a reset if sometime in the not too distant future we have a reckoning. A reckoning, from my point of view, involves the same sort of inflationary recession that we enjoyed, if that's the right phrase, in the beginning of the decade of the 80s. And whether or not there's the social will in the country, or more importantly, the political will, is a very, very different question. My hope, given the three choices that you gave me, which is reset, QE, or war, although I don't like the menu that you've offered up, certainly I would prefer to avoid war,
Yes.
most importantly. A reset would be interesting for me personally, in the sense of the Chinese curse, may you live through interesting times. I, of course, hope they manage to stick handle through this. And if the three choices that you gave me included QE, I would probably take the QE. The truth is, for Rick Rule, QE works extremely well. I don't get sucked into their game as a bond buyer. I have the assets and the income stream so that I can borrow money at artificially low interest rates. And I can buy, as an example, midstream natural gas assets for a return on capital employed of 9, borrowing money to buy those assets at 4.5. For me personally, QE is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Were it not accompanied by usurious tax rates, I would vote for QE for the rest of time, for me personally. But for other Americans, Americans that haven't been as lucky in life as I, or Americans that don't understand the way finance works, QE has been an absolute disaster.
Well, and with that, what is your biggest concern right now? What is the question that you ask that keeps you awake at night? What is that thing that gnaws at you that says, wow, I really need to...
Rory, is non-financial. I remember back in university, the description of government interference involving something that was called a moral hazard. And I didn't understand what a moral hazard was when I was 19, or perhaps I courted moral hazards, as many young men do. But the truth is, frankly, I was unsuccessful in most of those pursuits. But in my declining years, I think I've come to understand what moral hazards are. And moral hazards are an acceptance of the ethos that you aren't responsible for yourself, that society is responsible for you. A moral hazard involves the sense that counterfeiting is okay because liquidity is a substitute for solvency.
Right.
A moral hazard is the sense that society has that people who aren't equipped to deal with all of life's emergencies are better off disempowering themselves and assigning responsibility for their future to the state rather than to themselves. Moral hazard involves an artificially low interest rate which punishes savers and subsidizes spenders. And if I had to see something that keeps me awake at night, it's the thought of an increasingly envious society that has learned that it is blessed to consume rather than blessed to produce. I don't know how that ends because I'm not a sociologist, I'm a credit analyst. But for most of my supposing, it doesn't end well. Now, the truth is, I've made my money in life, Rory, by being an optimist, not a pessimist. And at the same point in time that I look at the moral challenges, I look at groups like Young Americans for Liberty, Liberty.me, Students for Liberty. I look at 500,000 young people around the world that spontaneously organized them with no encouragement from their elders whatsoever, including, I'm embarrassed to say, myself, into libertarian organizations where they didn't ask for money, they just asked for direction and assistance. And it's very difficult if you go to chapter meetings for Liberty.me or chapter meetings, for Students for Liberty, which I do, or participate in discussion groups with young people from Nepal and Madagascar on Liberty.me, and not being long-term optimistic, because the truth is that 7 or 8 good people can undo the work of 1,000 bad people. My client, Paul Stevens, points out to me that a young crew of pimply-faced kids in Silicon Valley can start a Google or an Apple and they can generate wealth faster than the 520 morons in Congress can waste it. And so, while you ask me about my fears are very real. But the truth is that, my parents and my grandparents went through World War II. I went through the 70s and early 80s when, given the social disruption that occurred where I grew up in the Bay Area of California, the problems that we faced, at least in a very immediate sense, were greater than negative real interest rates. And my suspicion is that the circumstance that we're going through as a society resembles very much the way the doctors described taking a punch from George Foreman, which was severe but survivable.
Oh, I like that. And last question, and I'll let you get back to your afternoon. I know you've got a lot to do, and I do as well. Aside from amassing huge amounts of wealth, why do you do what you do? Why would you be associated with Liberty.me or these libertarian groups, or why do you do what you do?
Well, the first thing is, Rory, after my 20s, I haven't worked a day in my life.
Well, now you're just bragging.
Other people would describe what I do as work, but I love it. It's
There you
like
go.
a chess master that gets paid to play chess.
Okay.
I enjoy what I do immensely. At Sprott, we have in excess of 200,000 clients worldwide.
Oh my.
I've met a lot of them, and I like most of them. I work with 170 colleagues that I like a lot. Those who we don't like, we arrange to have employment elsewhere. I really like what I do. My challenge is, of course, that I'm 62, and while the spirit is willing, the body is beginning to fail. I won't be able to work at this level for too many more years. But the truth is that I absolutely adore what I do. The other truth is that it's very exciting for me to proselytize for freedom. It's exciting for me to sit down in any forum, a classroom, a boardroom, or a bar, and talk to Democrats, talk to Republicans, talk to socialists, talk to libertarians. Of course, there's less utility for me to talk to libertarians because it's sort of like passing the collection plate through the choir. It feels good at the time, but it doesn't yield a net benefit to society. But the truth is, I'm engaging in some wonderful discussions right now with a couple of young socialists. And I think I have an absolute 100% probability of turning them not merely into libertarians, but truly turning them into anarcho-capitalists. And the way that you change the world, at least if you're an individual, isn't by massive strokes. You do it one person at a time, two people at a time. We built Sprott one client at a time. And freedom-minded people, irrespective of whether they describe themselves as libertarians or anarcho-capitalists or simply iconoclasts, can impact the world in the same fashion, liberating themselves before they liberate the world, and then liberating their peers one at a time. And I love that process.
Sounds like you're a student of Samuel Adams to me.
The founding fathers, while I'm apolitical in a traditional sense, had a wonderful sense of government, that neighbors had a voluntary and contractual duty to each other that took place on an individual basis and had to be negotiated one by one by one. That was Adams' genius. His sense of the state is that the state existed to protect individual rights, not infringe on individual rights. And to the extent that I was going to be sympathetic with any political interest, it would certainly be the political interests that generated the only really spectacular political documents that ever existed, in particular the Bill of Rights.
Yes. Well, that's the reason that I have the tagline that I do for my website, which is setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men, from Samuel Adams. I mean, and what you just described is exactly the quote that I've carried with me for close to, I guess, 10 years, 15 years now, at least. And that, that it doesn't take a majority, but a minority of irate, keen to set brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And that's exactly what it sounds like you're interested in as well. I mean, and I love that.
Another wonderful quote, tagline or quote that I think you'll enjoy was the old hippie Stuart Brand from the Whole Earth Catalog.
Okay.
His subhead was "Workers of the World Disperse," which I loved.
Workers of the world disperse.
A play on the old Marx thing.
Yes.
I loved it.
Oh, is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, or is there? I've I almost feel like I need to ask you one more question about platinum and palladium because I know that those are your babies. And
Well, in terms of platinum and palladium, I have another quote. This one from Patsy Cline. I was so wrong. I believe arithmetically that I'm not merely going to be right, that I'm going to be very, very right. I must say that the collapse in demand worldwide for all things manufactured has certainly postponed my thesis. The other part of my thesis that was wrong is I didn't anticipate the decline of the South African rand and the ruble relative to the dollar at the 50% level, which cut the operating costs of the mines so substantially. Now, that gets made up over time. If you look at the labor unrest in South Africa, it has to do with the fact that the workers' wages were already unsustainable and then in real terms got cut in half.
Wow.
This is a problem that resolves itself. It resolves itself in very unpleasant fashion over time. But the truth is that the utility associated with platinum and palladium is so high,
Right.
relative to its cost, that the price of platinum and palladium can double, literally double, with no change in industrial demand. And the industry is producing platinum, not palladium. The industry is producing platinum at about a 40% premium to what they sell it for. So think about a business as a businessman where you're making something for $1,500 an ounce. You're selling it for $1,000 an ounce. You're losing $500 an ounce and trying to make it up on volume. It's okay for a while, but it doesn't feel good over time. My thesis is this: if you are producing a product that society absolutely needs, and with regards to platinum, the equation is platinum versus smog.
Right.
That's the equation. If you're producing a product that has that much utility and you're losing money on every ounce, either the price goes up or the product goes away and smog appears. One needs to decide for oneself what's the most likely outcome over time.
There you have it. I mean, that's seeing, and that's you mentioned South Africa, and they're one of the largest. I think they're second to Russia as far as their palladium production.
They're 39% of world palladium.
Okay.
The Russians are basically all of the balance.
Yes.
And they're 70% of world platinum.
Okay.
So,
how do you see, with China being the manufacturer of the world and the plays that they're making in Africa? I mean, I think there's like 2 million Chinese nationals in all of the continent of Africa right now.
Right.
I mean, that are going around, they're conducting business with everybody that's willing to do business. I mean, do you see that playing out, or how do you see that playing out?
I see it playing out well. I, unlike many Americans of my ilk, see Chinese people as great potential allies of American people. Chinese people are education oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese people save.
Yes.
Chinese people invest. And the Chinese government, while I have a lot of problems with the fact that 20,000 people superimpose themselves on 1.4 billion people, have a pragmatic attitude towards domestic political affairs that the United States is sadly lacking in. When the Chinese go to Africa, they don't offer too much advice, but they build roads and railroads.
There you go.
If you were a resident of a rural part of Africa and you had your choice between American advice, often geared to Kansas, or a road, what would you choose? The Chinese have chosen to trade with countries.
Right.
The United States has troops deployed in 140 countries. And when the United States talks to third parties about a threat, the third parties see Chinese trade and they see American troops. And it's difficult to ask them to take our point of view with regards to what constitutes a threat when the Chinese are conducting trade with them and we're stationing troops there.
Right. See, and I've got a really great contact in Beijing. His name is Jeff Brown. He's little known. He's a great analyst. I've conducted several interviews with him, and that was the way that I described it. America conducts war while
Chinese
the East conducts business.
Trade.
Well, Rick, I certainly appreciate all your time today. And we've been speaking with Rick Rule, founder and president of Sprott
Global Resources, and you can find them at sprottglobal.com. Thank you very much, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.